I'm Bleeding Critic. Welcome to Scary Stories UK. The Witch at the Window. He held the phone in his hand while texting his friend, yet his eyes couldn't concentrate on the screen or the subtle glow coming from the television. There was a hint of cheap whiskey, vague memories, and the soul of harmonies, that distant music playing in the background, that seeped within him as he looked around the living room and felt like it wasn't his place to be. You see, physically he was in the room, but mentally he was elsewhere. The summer's humidity was starting to veer its unwelcoming place within the home, and he hated that. The winter was the best. There's nothing more comforting than the early nights, cold days, and satisfaction of knowing that his thoughts were all the warmth he needed. He wanted to go back, relive through the good times again, when life was carefree and being an adult wasn't even a fault. He wanted to do it all over again. A history that couldn't be repeated even as much as he closed his eyes and wished things would sort themselves. Oh yes, there were memories, many memories. Actually, some good ones. Now he closed his eyes and waited. Waited for the voices. Morning came, perhaps a slight hangover, but nothing an early shower couldn't remedy. However, the thoughts of the next evening still hung in his mind. Eventually there would be circumstances to deal with. It was inevitable that he'd have to come to terms with the darkness and what it offered. The days went quickly, too fast actually. His reflection in the mirror told a story of someone that had lost many years due to a reclusive lifestyle, perhaps a safe haven. Thin lines started to show around his eyes, his hair teased a subtle grey, and there was a hollowness to his facial structure. Some would say it was a rite of passage to growing older, but he thought differently. Regardless, he was exhausted as he stared into his past. He focused on his bright blue eyes. His eyes were always something people would compliment him on throughout the years. Someone once said they were ice blue, and that his eyes could freeze a soul, and that made him force a reminiscent smile. The day passed, the sun slowly started to fall, and the night air became cooler. There was less toxicity in the air. For a short while he was at peace with himself when he began his evening routine of having his old, comfortable couch consume his body. The TV provided a distraction as he once again took to his phone and superficially perused the internet. His eyes grew heavy. The attention faded and he connected his phone to the charger as he laid his head on the pillow. Maybe tonight will be different. It always started with whispers that gently woke him. They were calming at first. Then they became more hostile once he became a bit more coherent. The voices, always unintelligible, would subtly start with a few, then progressively multiply into a symphony of white noise. They had no dimensional placement, they were only there to cause torment. The louder they became, the more the insinuations of hostility would be directed inside his head and all around the room. At first, this only happened while he slept in his bedroom. He assumed there was a correlation between being too comfortable and vulnerable within that element, but that notion was short-lived though. The truth was that it didn't matter where he rested, they were there waiting. Oh yes, they've always been there. The fear began when he was just a child. The old, haggard witch that peered at him through the corner of his second-floor window, tapping on the glass with her long, bony fingers. Oh yes, she could sense his fear, and that just made his young, innocent flesh much more desirable to her offensive palate. Somehow she eventually managed to find her way into his closet that stood parallel to the bed. This made things much more disturbing. He could no longer hear her, but she'd send other little messages to make her presence known. One time he awoke to the silhouette of a man dancing around his room. He could barely make the image out, but he knew there was no head attached to the body. As long as the sheets were pulled up to his chin, he would be protected. The witch knew this and patiently waited. Many years had passed since then. His body had grown stronger, his mind matured, and new experiences paved a stretch of security. But the witch was still there, he knew it. His flesh, less appetizing, was still a trophy that needed to be collected. A subtle, distant breathing could always be heard before he passed out. The rules still applied from his youth. As long as he was protected up to his chin, he would be safe. The couch was incredibly comforting. It provided support on one side while allowing a peripheral view of his surroundings. It had been a while since he wanted the protection, a decade since he needed it. There were no more apparitions of headless men, no windows that separated him from a flesh-starved hag, and no closets that could shelter her. Just syllables, no coherence, just sounds. Long-forgotten tongues that bound him to the couch and forced subliminal torture. Words that morphed into thousands of groping hands that ran across his body from every imaginable direction while he remained paralyzed. The only movement ever allowed were his eyes. The witch granted him that much. She gained pleasure watching from the darkness as his ice-blue eyes frantically cut through the shadows and searched for the cause of torment. Only she didn't know that he prepared himself this time. He welcomed it now. The witch's breathing continued. The sheets were lowered away from his face and he smiled as the blue in his eyes faded. There were circumstances. He had enough of hiding and being afraid. His guard was down, and the ugly witch's patience paid off. After she ripped his vocal cords out to prevent him from screaming, she finally chewed and tasted his skin, blood and flesh. And oh yes, the wait was worth it.